Now, please, dear Stefan, come up and present yourself quickly, and the floor is yours, so everybody is waiting for this presentation. Thanks a lot for joining us this afternoon.
Yes, thank you very much, Michel, for the introduction. And hello, everybody here in the room. So it's a big pleasure for me to speak here today and to present our real case VFR into IIMC that we had on 2019 with during a night vision operation. And yes, during that time I was also a safety manager in our company, and I was deeply involved in the investigation later on during that. But first, a little bit more information, what happened.
On the night of May 22nd, 2019, the police flying squadron received a mission request for an operation in the neighboring federal state. During that night, the unit was manned at minimum strength. For the pilot, it wasn't often to be in charge as shift leader and pilot as well. The mission was about the persecution of criminals after an ATM had been blown up. Operations like this have a high priority, and fighting gang crime is a core task of the unit. Such crimes have increased in recent months, and there were certain expectations on the part of the authorities. Furthermore, the crew knew that such an operation could become very dynamic. On that night, the weather conditions for a flight with night vision goggles were different. The conditions at the home base and in the target area were unproblematic, but in order to reach the target area, however, a low mountain range had to be crossed. Here, the reported conditions were close to the company's minimum for flights with night vision goggles. The weather forecast for the second half of the night predicted a significant deterioration with fog formation for the entire low mountain range. The area that has to be flown over to the target area isn't much populated, but challenging to fly there due to the obstacles. This applies in particular to night flights in poor weather conditions. The crew knew this, and also that it's not their normal local area of operations. The crew, consisting of a pilot, a technical crew member, TCM, and an operator, decided to undertake the mission flight and took off from home base at 2:41 a.m. local time. All crew members were trained and cleared for flights with night vision imaging system. The pilot had a total flying experience of 866 hours, 510 hours as pilot in command, and of those 115 hours with night vision goggles. He does not have an instrument rating. The TCM had a comparable flight experience. At that time, the crew constellation for the cockpit was the youngest possible in the company for operational flights at night. They were not very experienced in comparison with other crews in the squadron. Due to the weather conditions on the outbound flight, a direct flight path was not possible. However, the crew managed to reach the target area. The on-site mission went according to plan and the needs of the other forces on the ground. However, the crew recognized in the time on site continuous deterioration of the weather conditions. In this phase, a weather station 10 nautical miles away showed a similar development. Despite the weather situation observed, the crew remained on site until the amount of fuel remaining reached the value that still permitted a direct return to home base. Here it is important to know that there is a small airfield in the vicinity where there is a 24/7 refueling option for police helicopters. The airfield was only 8 nautical miles away and easy to reach despite the weather conditions. But the crew decided to take the direct flight path with the remaining amount of fuel to go to home base. But they had to realize soon that the flying weather conditions on the way back in the low mountain range deteriorated again. In the meantime, massive fog had formed. Again, a direct flight track was not possible, and the crew decided to proceed southbound, 6 nautical miles west of Airport Frankfurt-Hahn. Flight altitude and speed had to be reduced continuously. The crew wanted to fly back the same way they came. They knew that they should find a way home as soon as possible because they were running out of fuel. They pressed on and didn't waste any thought on a precautionary landing in the fields. The TCM tried to find a suitable route on the moving map and warned the pilot of possible obstacles. He wanted to be the best supporter for the pilot's decisions and focused on that. Back on the desired track they came from, the weather got even worse. Next to a small town, the terrain rose again and the clouds got lower. Visibility deteriorated because of the fog. It was impossible to continue flying in this direction. The pilot initiated a turn to the right due to poor visibility. He used the upper modes, altitude and heading of the autopilot. The indicated airspeed was 65 to 70 knots and the altitude 1,900 feet mean sea level, approximately 500 feet above ground level. In the right turn flown by the autopilot, it happens. The aircraft entered inadvertently IMC. Without visual references to the ground, the pilot increased the bank angle by pushing the stick further to the right. He hoped that would get them out quicker, but it wasn't like that. By overdriving the autopilot, he didn't feel a normal control touch and, in the turn, he unintentionally climbed. He struggled against the autopilot's steering forces as the upper modes were still engaged. Thoughts raced through his mind. He knew that a descent was no longer possible. There was only one option.
Climbing.
Check bank, check speed.
Where are the tops?
At about 3,000 feet MSL, the helicopter came out of the clouds. The emergency climb out in IMC took about 30 seconds. An emergency call or a corresponding transponder switching was not made. In the stressful situation, the pilot was unable to engage the autopilot during that. He did this again after level off in 3,750 feet MSL after the situation eased for a short period of time. There was a moment of happiness in the crew because they survived the famous 56 seconds after an unintentional entry into IMC. The pilot managed to maintain control of the aircraft. But then, the crew realized that there was a closed layer of clouds below them. However, the pilot informed radar on their situation for the first time and requested the weather conditions of Frankfurt Airport, which is next home base. The co-pilot, who has barely spoken in the last 2 minutes, pointed out that the remaining fuel is no longer sufficient to home base. There were only 90 liters of fuel left in the main tank, which corresponds to a flight time of 18 minutes. The position at this time was 3 nautical miles west of the airport Frankfurt-Hahn, which was in operation and had an instrument landing system. But the pilot mentioned that he does not have an instrument rating and has no experience with that. He flew such an approach in the simulator, but the cockpit was different there and a different flight management system was installed. The pilot and the TCM didn't know how to do the setting for an ILS approach so that it could be flown by the autopilot. Above the clouds, time seemed to stand still for the crew, but the helicopter kept flying and burning fuel. In reality, time was running out, and in the minds of the crew there was only one question. What now?
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, that is the situation. The crew was captured over the clouds in their situation, in their stressful situation. Only fuel remaining left in the main tank for 18 minutes flight time. Not enough to get to home base, to Frankfurt. And a pilot without IR rating, without instrument rating, and the crew was not able, for a setting for an ILS, to couple the autopilot to fly an ILS to the airport next to them at Frankfurt-Hahn. That was the situation. And the crew was deeply impressed what happened seconds before. They recovered the emergency climb out. That was a good part on that. So he managed it, but how to continue? And yeah, it was a crew which was confused, maybe had a kind of tunnel vision, which is unexperienced, and it was in the early morning, over the clouds, alone in the dark, and there was a radio contact to the home base, but there was, in brackets, only an operator, and not an experienced pilot with an IR rating who can help, or a TRI or whatever. So they were really alone over the clouds. And that was the situation. What now? And for today, or later on in the investigation in our company, the question is how to prevent a disaster. So we believed until that point that we have a very good training concept for years. We do that in a simulator, and we're doing all the stuff you see here. And we have a framework around that, an operational manual, we have checklists, we have limits, operational limits, and so on. But we recognize that there are certain gaps that we have to fill. We do the training, and we believed we can avoid, when confronted with flying in degraded visual environment, that we avoid IIMC situations that we all know can easily lead to spatial disorientation, and that can lead to loss of control of the aircraft, and or a controlled flight into terrain. We all know this, and we would like to avoid pictures like these. And the EASA safety review shows us that this kind of accidents are still the top killers in our business. And we saw this graphic, I think, yesterday. And that's from the helicopter safety team, the IIMC training fact sheet. We know that accidents related to IIMC have the highest rate of fatality. We all know that. And what we also know is that it happens not only to small helicopters. It happens to operators, to companies with modern helicopters with a 3 or 4x autopilot, and we all know these accidents. And the pictures below, we heard the sad news these days from Italy. That was the crash on the morning in Italy with a 109 helicopter with 7 fatalities. Okay, we have to see what the investigation says in a few months, but what we can say is that there was a stormy weather, degraded visual environments when this happened. That's what we know until now. We would like to avoid that. And we believed if we do a training, what you see here, that is enough for our crews. So if you we trained them. If you are confronted with, in case with an IIMC event or UIMC, that you have to know that we have two kind of pilots. We have some pilots that are only VFR rated and also IFR rated crews. So we have to split up our training a little bit, so doing some training for the VFR pilots and for the IFR pilots. But we believed if you come in inadvertently into IMC conditions for VFR pilot, whether day or night operation, do a 180 degrees turn, reduce your speed, V Yankee maybe is the best available, and then recheck the terrain to decide in which direction do the turn, and do that with the upper modes, heading and altitude, for example, to get out of that. And for pilots, for IFR pilots, yeah, they can do actually the same procedure, or if the situation permits, maybe the best available is to do an emergency climb out with the autopilot with the best rate of climb speed. Okay, checking, do it with the autopilot, and yeah, have to check, okay, what is the OET, is there icing conditions, and so on. And then proceed to the next airport, where it is possible to fly an RMP approach or an ILS approach. That was our training concept until that point. So, at the end of my presentation, I will show you what really happened to the crew. That's my tactic to keep up your attention a little bit. But first, you have to listen how we dealt with this occurrence in our company. And if we have an incident, yeah, a quick overview about the process, which is starting then. We heard a nice presentation in the morning from John Vincent, all about how a good safety management is working. So, quick overview about these principles. So, if an occurrence happens, then hopefully you get a report in your company, and then you, on that you can do a risk assessment, start an investigation, and maybe the outcome of that is there are some corrective measures. And the most important point is to share these informations in your company to the staff. And maybe beyond that, other companies can learn also from these occurrences. And afterwards, there is the process that there is a recheck of the effectiveness of the corrective action. Okay, in our case, 3 days after this incident, the affected crew of this incident wrote a report in our safety management system. And that was the best contribution for our company, of the crew. Because what was the alternative of that? If they say nothing, we know nothing. Then this was only a safety landing on an airport due to bad weather conditions. And that's it. But they wrote a report, and so we can start an investigation on that. And that was for me, during that time, or for our company, the proof that our safety management system has arrived in our company, that we have an open error culture. And the crew know that they had the possibility to write a report or not, but they did it, and that was a big contribution. And how that works, it is absolutely necessary that you have managers in the background of the company that support a non-punitive system. Okay, then we start risk assessment and the whole process behind that, doing some interviews with the crew, and doing some safety boards, and then we decide what to do with the crew, what is the corrective action, and so on. And I was deeply involved working with the crew for a month, I can say, to get them out of their situation, because they were really affected on that. So we offered them help from psychologists and We did 4 hours in a full flight simulator to analyze what happened for them and for us to get information all about this incident. And last but not least, we defined the follow-up measures with flight operation and our training organization. And that's what I talk about here. And what I can say is, if you ask questions, then these questions lead to answers. And if you don't ask questions, and you see only the occurrence, the incident, then it's easy. Everyone sees in your company, okay, there was an incident, then you have an active failure, and you have the crew. And then you can stop here. But then you're always scratching on the surface. But when you are asking questions, which leads to answers, why did that happen? Because, then that allows you to dive up into the deepness of your company. And that is very important, I think, because then you learn a lot about your operation, about the preconditions, your organization itself, what about your training concepts, and what about the culture in your company. For example, what is the role model of older, experienced pilot in the company, and so on. So, and these answers and all this information, we collect them and put them in a kind of fishbone diagram. I think most of you know that kind of graphic, which there you can put in all the courses, which everyone knows mostly. For example, the 180 degrees turn went wrong. He oversteered the autopilot system and so on, which leads direct to, that is the active failure, the course. But there are a lot of contributing factors that's below in the deepness. What about the crew, concerning the training, what does the instructor did with the crews in the simulator, for example? What about our flight operation in generally? We do a multi-pilot operation, we do single pilot operation. As I said, we had some pilots with an instrument rating and some without, all doing NVIS operation. And then you get an impression, is that really good? And you talk about just culture, complacency, practical drift, and so on. And then you have some cross lines, and here, these cross lines, everything depends on each other. And here you can also find a good approach for corrective measures. And one corrective measure was that our flight operation manager did a classroom day with all the pilots and the technical crew members and the operators. So, and there he talked about, what is the pressing on effect, get home, eat this, everyone knows that. How, what is the expectation from the company to each pilot and so on. And he made clear in this session that no mission is more important than the own life or the life of the crew. And for that, he also used the Land and Live campaign, for example, from the Helicopter Association International. And I think that is an important part, because it is not necessary to invent everything new. We can use all these campaigns and training sheets to underline our philosophy. And we do this, and our accountable manager signed that, and we talked about that with our staff. And it is very important, we use that to pimp up our safety policy a little bit about that topic, land and live. And we talked also about how we intend to do our operation and how we do our operation. And I think every one of you know the picture on the left side. And if there is, the spread is too big, then that is what we call the practical drift. And if the practical drift in the company is too big, then it is a potential danger to get incidents, occurrences, or maybe accidents. And we talked about complacency. I said the role model of the older experienced pilots. What we see in our company is that we get young pilots in the operation. They come from the flight school, then we do a type rating, we do a lot of training with night vision goggles. Then there was a time they get released, and then they fly to get some experience under supervision with older pilots. And then they get released in the operation. And then they fly with other pilots. And what we see, they really quick adopt the behavior of the older guys. There are some good things, but there are also some bad things. And that's what I want to say. You have to look, where is the practical drift? What is really happened in the own operation in respective to pressing on effect, how to fly backwards from a mission. And what we see, we have several incidents during in bad weather situations. And what we can say is, it is easy for the crews when they get the mission, they proceed to the target area and they come to their official or described weather limits. Then they cut off the mission. It's no problem. We haven't any problems with that. Everyone is turning around. Okay, weather is not so good. Okay, canceling, going back. Okay, that's it. We reached the limit. But what happened here is the mission was done, and now we are flying backwards to get home, to get safe. And what we know from a lot of statistics, that in the last part of a mission flight, these really severe incidents or accidents happened doing that, the pressing on effect and so on. And that's what we see in our company as well. And what we also try to get now is that's an ongoing process, is a kind of flight risk assessment tool. We have a kind of software here. There's a picture, but it is still in progress. And yeah, a flight risk assessment tool isn't a go or no-go device to decide for a flight. But it can be a good device to underline a decision of a pilot, whether they are going to do the flight or not. So the flight risk assessment tool there to make the pilot or the crew aware of possible risks for the flight or for the mission or for the day. But what we see is there are several programs around, Airbus, Leonardo's, and a lot of other companies have something, but what we see is we need a customized program which fits to our operation, which is easy to handle for the pilot and easy to do. So, and it is still in progress. So to get aware of the situation, of weather preparation and so on. And now a big part is the training issue. And what we can say, what we learned really out of this incident is that we have to change our training program when dealing with flying in degraded visual environment and especially for the IIMC issue. And it's a holistic approach on that, and we focused on recognition and avoidance. And what we say is, and that's the most important, it's all about mindset. And so we have to teach our crews how to prepare a flight, and that they know the limits, the possible risks, and that they communicate to each other, and to have a plan B. And the plan B could be a precautionary landing. But when they have that in mind, they can use these tools. But you have to remember them all the time. And that is a big task of the training organization in the company, I think. And you talk how to prevent IIMC. Get a complete weather information. and talk about the terrain we're going in. Obstacles. Is there a good light situation? What about our NVIS for night, the weather situation conditions for the night vision goggle? And so on. And for that, we also use the publications that are all around. And that is recognition and avoidance. And we have to learn something about our crews, about the people behind the stick. And we have really to focus on that to avoid these situations you saw here in the film. And the other part is that we have to train them. When it happens, they need a kind of guideline to get out of that. That could be an IFR pickup, the 180 degrees turn, or maybe another solution. And remember the situation of this crew in this specific incident. A VFR crew, VFR pilot, single pilot operation, above the clouds, no fuel, and unable to do a setting. What do you think? What do they need? That was the question, how to prevent the disaster. And so our solution for that, and that's what I want to present you here, is that we designed a kind of emergency checklist, especially for this situation. You're in this situation and you need a guideline what to do. And we spend a lot of time to create these checklists, and it lasts at least over 2 years. And there were several revisions, and is especially designed for an EC-145 helicopters with flight management system, the Garmin GTN 750. And what you see here on the right side, that's our electronic flight bag we use for the 4Flight app, and there are some information about that. But the main part is do the setting for the helicopter. And what we know, or what most of us know, use for IFR flights, it's so-called a challenge and response checklist. But we try to give VFR pilot an IFR checklist, which is a challenge and response. So they put the setting per mind, and then they go through it, but it doesn't work. So what they need is a read and do checklist, and that's a read and do checklist. You're doing step by step the things to, and yeah, and we checked these with our pilots in the simulator for 2 years. And yes, what I can say, it works. And what you see, there are some memory items. We know all that from other emergency procedures. How to handle, yes, the climb out, and what to do next. And then we put in, for a good decision making, the 4-deck model, and give them in detail some advice. So what about icing? And they have to read this, and then they are looking on the OET sensor, and then they're doing the next step, maybe request a lower level, and so on. And at least it's 4 sides. And then on the left side, you see what to do on the helicopter. Okay, to set the ILS frequency. It is designed for an ILS. Why ILS? Because that's the lowest minimum. And you have to know, we are operating in Germany. We have a lot of airports around. We have a 24/7 operation, and especially near Frankfurt, it is always possible to do an ILS approach, yeah? In bad weather conditions, in case of emergency. And that's the guideline. And here the last part, there is a note. Sorry, it is in German. Because if we do it in English, it's the original checklist, but in a stressful situation, not everyone in our cockpit can do a good English, so it's easier for them to read it in German, in the native language. And if the situation is so that maybe the 200 feet decision altitude, the decision height, sorry, is the weather conditions are bad, but that's the last resort. Then there is, we described the procedure that they fly the helicopter over the runway. It will reduce, it will automatically level off in 50 feet or 60 feet. And then he can lower the collective with a 3x autopilot, and then the helicopter will descend slowly, and then in fog you will see the landing lights, yeah, and you can do an approach, and that's the last option. With a 4x autopilot, maybe it's much more easier, yeah. Okay, that was one of our big outcome to close the gap for a VFR pilot if that happens, that the 180 degrees turn went wrong, he unintentionally pulled in, find himself with the machine over the clouds, and there was no escape. Then he can do that. And it works. We tested it several times. Lesson learned. Some statements. Our night vision operation increases the risk to get into IIMC, definitely, because we have a lot of experienced pilots in our company with 800 or 1,000 hours of endless flight time, and they say by themselves it happens again and again. The Google is crizzling, the picture goes worse, then you're switching on the nose light, and then they find themselves in the clouds. So what I want to say is the borderline is getting smaller. So, and you fly with NVIS, you fly often in conditions which you won't do during day VFR. And so that's very important to know. Yeah, I already said that. That was one big lesson learned. We have to focus on recognition and avoidance. And we have to spend more time doing this kind of training. And what we train, for example, in the past is we use so much training in the simulator, of so much time doing OEI training. But OEI training in such a helicopter. So we learned we spend more time in decision making, in non-technical skills and not technical skills. We have to train these technical skills for sure, but later on in the operation we have to focus on non-technical skills and decision-making process. And that sounds so easy. No training means no safety of action. No safety of action means no safety of operation. It sounds so easy, but it isn't easy. It is hard work. And that's especially for the training organization. We have to adopt our training methods on the skills and experience of the pilots. So you cannot do the same training which you do for IFR pilots. You cannot do that with VFR pilots, for example. Yes, that I already said. The standardization of the instructors is very important, and how to teach. And if you have more instructors in the company, you have to do a good standardization so that they are doing all the same job, talking of the same things, and so on. That's also a big lesson learned, because what we see is the recovery procedure for IIMC. Yeah, it is done, but every instructor in our company did it on a different way, and that cannot be. So we have a holistic approach on that, recognition and avoidance, recovery procedures, and we have to do the same with the pilots, and the instructors have to be standardized. And for me, that's for me, my takeaway message for today is exactly this sentence. Everything starts to stop the Swiss cheese model. Everything starts with that statement that we have to qualify our pilots and crews on the same level of our operation, which is intended, and on the certification of the helicopter. In other words, it makes no sense to buy a $15 million or euro million machine, which is certified single pilot IFR operation. You do an law enforcement or a medical service, you do an operation with NVIS, which can easily turn into in IIMC conditions, and then you put in a crew which is not qualified for that. And here everything starts. And that leads to our decision in our company. Here it is. That's our vision. We decided first we do the implementation of all our measures. That's what I said, an ongoing process, for example, with the flight risk assessment tool. And what we do next year in Q1 is that we have some pilots where in the 7 years period the instrument rating is resting, and we do a new renewal. Our flight aviation school for police service, our training organization, to bring them back and give them the space for training, to get back the confidence for flying IFR. And the decision was in our company that up now, the new standard for flying NVIS in our operation, the pilot should qualify as pilot in command with an instrument rating for single pilot or multi-pilot operation. We know there's the multi-pilot, single-pilot operation gone away, but to do this kind of operation. And we give them the space for training, flying in these weather situations to get confident with that. And that was the big outcome out of this incident. And we shared all this information, what I said here, to other companies, especially other police squadrons, helicopter squadrons, and for the federal police. And it has, this incident has also an impact beyond our squadron. And what I can say here, and I'm very, very happy about that, is that the aviation school for the police service all over in Germany. It is located not far from here, Cologne, in Hangela. That there is a draft, and in this draft, they pick up this topic. And what I can say is that there's a strong recommendation to all companies that this, what I said, should be the new standard for police helicopter operation for law enforcement when flying in this machine, in this environment. And that's it. I think that's our goal for flight safety in the future. But what we see now is it takes a long time. The incident happened 2019, and now, we are close to 2023, and to cut off a license, that's easy in a company to save money. But to regain, to renew, do a renewal, that costs a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of work, and the pilots have to do the get back the experience. So I don't know when we finished, but we have to start, and it's totally clear. It's a long road to travel, but we have to start. Okay, that was my message, and I think you will see what happened to the crew over the clouds, and that I show you here.
Over the clouds, the crew had to make a decision. As mentioned at the beginning, the crew refused an instrument approach due to a lack of procedural knowledge and qualifications. Caught in this emergency situation, the TCM developed feelings of fear. But he continued to try, together with his pilots, to find a way out. After the crew gained an overview of the weather situation in a large right turn flown by the autopilot, they began to descend in a southwesterly direction. The pilot informed ATC that they would be flying westbound again under the clouds in order to then attempt to land at Airport Frankfurt-Hahn. The controller informed the tower in advance. The crew hoped for a hole in the cloud layer, and they found one. They saw a few lights of a town shimmering through. The descent was through this gap below the clouds. The crew was not aware that this was almost exactly the area in which they had the IIMC event minutes before. Back in the degraded visual environment, the crew again attempted to find an eastbound flight path to the airport. They continued their flight below the minimum safety altitude of 500 feet ground. In the meantime, there was radio contact with the tower controller because they already entered the CTR, which was IMC. It was now dawn. This was a particularly dangerous time because they had to decide whether or not to continue the flight with night vision goggles. Again, they pressed on to reach the airport and didn't waste any thoughts on a precautionary landing. They flew over 2 small towns at low altitude until they saw the landing lights of runway 21. The landing at the airport followed.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, a real human factor case, isn't it? And yeah, it was a lucky ending for our company, and a lucky ending especially for our crew and the helicopter. So we learned a lot out of this, and I hope maybe I can share this information and the lesson learned here, and maybe you can learn also from that. That's is my goal. Thank you very much. In this sense, always together for safety. Thank you.